All right. Thank you all for coming. For those of you who are new to the London Ayn Rand meetup, we run events. We have a weekly discussion group on Rand's philosophy that meets every Wednesday. We do many of these talks, and we're doing more and more of them. Our next event is here next Monday. It's the Yaron Brook Show. We're going to be discussing left versus right, which is worse. And then the week after that, hopefully you all saw these flyers, we're going to have an event with Yaron Brook, Brendan O'Neill of Spiked, and Kate Andrews from the IEA. Should government regulate Facebook, social media, and free speech? And then the week after that, we're going to be back here with Dr. Nikos Soterakopoulos and Joanna Williams. So we have many events coming up soon, in addition to our Wednesday discussions. We also have Ayn Rand meetups outside of London. We have 3 of them at the moment. We're launching 3 more this year, and then a few more next year. We try to make as many of our events free, and tonight, as most of our events, is free. And the way we fund it is mostly by donations, so if you value what we do, please consider making a donation either on the website, or you can speak to me later and I'll, if you want to make regular donations, that's always welcome. Our speaker tonight, Josh Dixon, is an addiction specialist. He's a practical psychology professional. He runs a retreat called Resurface, which you can find out about with the flyers in the back. And today he's going to be talking about optimism. So please join me in welcoming Josh Dixon.
Thank you, Razi. I didn't know I was going to have to use a microphone, so forgive me. I don't have a huge amount of mic technique. So I'll do my best. Optimism. It's a strange concept for a lot of people. A lot of people dismiss it. A lot of people think it's just a sort of fluffy term. And it's a subject that I had to really get to grips with because a lot of work that I do, I primarily, as Razi introduced me, I started off as an addictions counselor and I'm a trauma specialist. I work a lot with PTSD and developmental trauma. And one of the crucial elements of working with people who are suffering from those kind of conditions is that they have enough of what we call adaptive capacity to be able to do that work. And I would find that a lot of clients would struggle to even have any kind of positive belief about themselves, identify any kind of positive memories in their life. One of the sad things about trauma in particular is it completely changes, it flips your worldview. You can be doing really well and have a pretty benevolent view of the world, and then you can have literally one incident sometimes can completely transform that, turn it upside down. And something happens in the brain that stops you from being able to access what we call positive memory networks. And so I'd be working with people and who would be very stuck. They'd be very dissociated, and as a result, we couldn't do the work that I wanted to be able to do. So I had to sort of go back to scratch in some ways and really start studying what's known now as positive psychology, the science of flourishing. And one of the key proponents of that is optimism. But before we get to optimism, I just want to mention that there are certain things, and I've spoken about this before, so some of you, I apologize if you heard this before, but there are certain key things that need to be in place if you want to be happy or flourish. And I'll just quickly say what they are, that you need to have access to and savor positive memories. So you need to be able to reflect upon memories from the past, that you have an image, you have a positive thought that goes with that, and you have positive emotions and sensations that go with that. Happy people are able to do that. They often do that quite naturally, but it's also something that can be taught. So positive emotion is a real key component of flourishing. Another one is engagement or flow. I was talking with someone earlier a little bit about that, but any kind of activity where you really feel in the moment, you feel at one with what you're doing, you're being challenged, you can cope with that challenge, you're receiving immediate feedback. Think of skiing, think of playing football, think of painting a picture, think of ballet, etc. But these kind of activities that generate immediate feedback, they challenge you, they push your limits, you rise to that challenge, and as a result you have a deep sense of satisfaction. It also generates a whole load of chemicals in the brain that are very gratifying. Relationships, flourishing people have many types of relationship. Good healthy romantic relationships, a wide range of friends. They are very comfortable to have friends of all different kinds of ages. They're very comfortable to have mentors. They're very comfortable to have people that they're helping up the ladder, etc. Flourishing people have a wide range of relationships, and there's a way of looking at positive relationships. They also have a real sense of meaning in their life or purpose. You know, they have a reason for getting out of bed every day. And there are, if you're struggling with that, there are certain techniques and things that you can do to learn, one, what your values are, and then how you can seek and obtain your values to really foster that sense of meaning and purpose in your life. And then the other key component of flourishing is accomplishment, doing things that you wanted to do and achieving that. So that's where I first started working with that, and a lot of people really benefit from that kind of work. But there is actually there are some meta positions that need to be in place before you can do those things. And I was running a retreat in Morocco a couple of weeks ago, and I really saw this firsthand, that quite a few of the people who I was working with there were very able to do and partake in the activities we were doing, but there were a couple of people deeply depressed who just couldn't access positive emotion. They couldn't even contemplate meaning and purpose. And as part of the program I was running, I also had elements on optimism, resilience, mindsets, and self-esteem. And these elements have to be in place to be able to do those core elements that I started talking about. And the one that I've always found time and time again that has the biggest impact is optimism. And this optimism is a term that's often dismissed. And there's a reason for that, and I'm going to come to that in a sec. But first of all, I just wanted to put out to people here, what does optimism mean to you? Anyone here got what optimism means to them they would like to share? Yeah? A positive outlook, yeah. Yeah. That which is as opposed to that which is not.
As in mathematics, if you're on the plus axiom and
Yeah.
focus on what is, as opposed to what is not. So, say you'd expect something, but it didn't happen, or think about something which hasn't happened yet. So those are things that are not. They're still in the potential.
So in the old-fashioned sense, the glass is half full, not half empty. You're looking at something that is there and that which isn't there.
Not necessarily half full or half empty. That's more which is bad or good, but then just the ability to see things as they are
Okay.
before judging them as good or bad.
Okay. Yeah.
For me, it's setting goals and making steps and plans to try to achieve those goals. So I feel optimistic about that, about trying to achieve them.
So it's an attitude in how you are seeking out those goals, etc.
Yeah.
How you approach. Okay. Anyone else got something they want to share? Like, yeah.
Being able to take a risk.
Sorry.
Being able to take
a risk. Okay.
Like believing that the best outcome is possible
believing the best outcomes possible. Yeah, I mean, these are kind of the standard things that people put out there, and one of the main things about optimism is also that I find is that a lot of people are like, Dave, he's really optimistic. He just always thinks the best thing is going to happen, or it's always going to work out, etc. And this is kind of what standard optimism is to a lot of people. And optimism is often something that people talk about as he's just naturally or she's just naturally optimistic and someone else is naturally pessimistic. And this is what we mean, this is what a lot of people do refer to as optimism. And it's what we, in psychology, we call dispositional optimism. It's one's disposition. It just is the way you are. You are sort of optimistic and always looking to the future and thinking things are going to work out, or you're more of a pessimist and that's just the way you are and you always think that things are going to go bad or go wrong. That's kind of the standard. That's what I hear all the time, and that's what we often see out in the world. And so dispositional optimism, it's defined as having a personality trait, basically. That's the way you are. And one of the things is most people believe that personality traits are fixed. So if one is optimistic, that's just a trait you're pretty much born with, or maybe formed in very key early years, and that's just the way you are. And what's a shame about this, as I've learned, is that therefore if it's fixed, you either are optimistic or you're pessimistic, and that's it. And what I want to hopefully show today, and this is what I learned, the real pioneer of this work was Martin Seligman in the 90s. He wrote a fantastic book called Learned Optimism. And what we found is that optimism is something that you can change. You can become more optimistic. Now, do you want to become more optimistic? That's something you might want to ask yourself. You might say, do you know what, I'm quite happy being pessimistic. I'm quite happy always sort of fearing the worst or seeing the world in this way. But what the research has shown is that if you are optimistic, you are much more likely to succeed in life. You're much more likely to have successful relationships. You're going to live probably about 20, 25 years longer. You're much less likely to develop heart disease. There's some interesting research on that one of the reasons that optimistic people live so much longer than pessimists is it's literally just the pressure you're putting on your heart. When you are having that way of thinking and seeing the world every day, you are producing so much cortisol that adds up over a lifetime. You're talking 15, 20 years worth of difference. So one thing that's interesting about optimists are people who, when bad events occur, believe it's temporary. This is key. Pessimists believe that when bad events occur, it's permanent. So we're really looking at the way you think. They will tell themselves it's just one situation and I can do something about it. I'm talking about the optimist here, not the pessimist. And optimism is a crucial feature of resilience. Now, resilience is something that you train in yourself. Yeah, one sort of definition of resilience is the ability to draw upon internal and external resources when maybe in a crisis or in a high-pressure environment situation. If you're optimistic, you believe that you can draw on those resources. If you're pessimistic, there's no point. So optimism is a key feature of resilience. It's also, optimism is a term that was considered a sort of bit of a dirty word in psychology for a long time. It was sort of considered naive, unrealistic, and just sort of a bit of a freak coincidence that you are optimistic because that's just the way you were born, etc. And I'm afraid that mirrors a huge amount of general psychology anyway. Psychology until the 1960s was dominated by behaviorism that basically believed everything was to do with Pavlovian responses, or it's dominated by Freudian or neo-Freudian psychoanalysis that basically believed that everything that you did now was a direct result of your childhood. And both of those positions denied conscious causation. So optimism had and has had a long time this bad rep. But what was fantastic about the research and that came out of in the 90s, Seligman's work, is that actually, one, optimists are thriving, happy lives, doing much better in work, doing much better in relationships, living much longer and much healthier. But also that it was something that you could change. You could be a pessimist and change yourself into an optimist. And people were very resistant to this, but that people in the same time were very resistant to cognitive therapy, big breakthrough in the 60s. They were very resistant to all the PTSD research and breakthrough therapies of the 70s and 80s. You know, there's always been this resistance to anything that's considered new. However, I'm hoping that tonight you'll have a sense of what you can do if you feel that maybe, or you think, sorry, that maybe you do actually have more of a pessimistic mindset that you haven't thought, or you think you're optimistic and you're not. This was my experience. There's a very famous, when I say famous, I mean famous within psychology university, small niche. But there's, if you go to the University of Pennsylvania and you sign up to the Authentic Happiness website there, it's got millions of subscribers. There's I think 50 plus questionnaires there, but one of them is the Learned Optimism questionnaire. So I took this. I thought, I'm a pretty optimistic guy. I've got like a nice life. I'm happy in my work. I've got good friends. I have I live by a philosophy that enjoys living on this earth. I'm not sort of beholden to original sin or any kind of religious dogma or anything like that. You know, I thought I'm a pretty optimistic person. And I did this questionnaire, and I came out mildly pessimistic in most areas, and not particularly hopeful. That's not the technical term, but that's what, you know, getting that across. And I was really surprised. And I had to, again, this was part of my learning journey. There's nothing like working as a psychologist to find out more and more about yourself. And from that, I learned, and was being able to share this with my clients, ways of changing the way I see the world. And I had to learn about this concept of learned helplessness, which a lot of people know about. But basically, does anyone here know about the concept of learned helplessness? It's one of the main sort of models for depression, explaining depression and trauma. Basically, learned helplessness is, if you think about, we all know or have known people who have been in relationships where you wanted to say, why don't you just leave? The door's open, you can go. But there's a sort of certain form of submission going on that you notice. Or it's literally, you open the door and you say you can go, and that people will still just keep walking past that open door and carrying on in this sort of cycle of, you might say, trauma or abuse or just sort of negativity. And what basically happens over time is that if you are in a situation which you believe you can't escape from, you will just learn to become helpless. And once you've learned to become helpless, it's very, very, very difficult to get out of that mindset. Now, you see this in animals. The research came out of working with dogs and electric shocks when you're allowed to do that sort of thing in the 60s. But the dogs actually learned to become helpless when they had the option of getting food or not getting the food. There's quite a lot of parameters, but basically, trust me, the dogs, the 3 sets of dogs, but one set of dogs ended up lying down in the electric shock instead of moving. And this completely refuted the behaviorist school that said that that would never happen. And this is one of the big breakthrough and changes. So if you basically have what is perceived as inescapable trauma, you become helpless. And we see this a lot. Stockholm syndrome is the ultimate example of that. When bad things happen, nothing you do matters. When that gets ingrained, you will become helpless. That is really the position of the pessimist when underlying it all. And that has to be made conscious if you want to work through it. Now, I think I in my own experience, had a sense of learned helplessness that I wasn't even aware of. And it was doing that test and doing the work and etc. that helped me get through that. But I just want to illustrate this to you now with this. This is an exercise that is quite powerful. Everyone here remembers being 12, 13, 14, not necessarily the greatest age. You know, if I look back, I don't think I would want to be 14 again. You know, this sort of self-obsession and need to individuate, but to fit in, and just constantly questioning everything, and not having a mature enough experience of life, or prefrontal cortex not nearly grown enough, etc. I would say a very difficult age. So I think everyone in this room could probably relate to this. Okay, so you are a 12-year-old girl, and you walk into the cafeteria, and all of your friends are sitting in a different place, and they don't ask you to sit with them. And you say to yourself, no one likes me, I'm a loser. I think, can we see that this is a situation that you could relate to, or you would, you know, is familiar, or you would have seen, etc. And what would be a way of assessing this situation in an optimistic manner? I finally got time to myself. Do you know what? You're the first person who's ever said that. Not in the world, I'm sure, but the first time whenever I've done this. But that's a nice way of looking at it. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That's seeing what is that they did not ask her. So that would be seeing what is not.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm with you in what you're saying. But what would be an optimistic way of assessing the situation? Yeah.
To say that you have so much choice of where you want to sit, where you can sit, because all your friends are. Or maybe.
Yeah. Okay, that's one way. Yeah.
Maybe approaching them to being proactive rather than passive. So they didn't ask her.
But imagine that they don't want you to sit with them, and that's clear.
Well,
Yeah.
I would just say, well, I don't care. Finally, I'm going to spend some time with the best person I know, me.
Okay, that's one way. But what would be an okay? But what might be an optimistic way of assessing the situation? Yeah. Assessing the situation.
Why it happened to me.
This person at the moment is saying to themselves, "I'm a loser.
Yeah.
No one wants to be me." What might be an optimistic way of assessing this situation?
They're busy.
Yeah, they're busy. Yeah.
They have full judgment of character. I'm not a loser. They may not like me, but it's alright. They may not be my friends. Sometimes other people don't like me.
Okay.
Be my friends.
That's still kind of sitting in the negative, but I see what you're saying.
She
Yeah.
can just stop and ask, do I want to sit with them? If they say yes, then
Yeah.
she can go and ask,
But
can I sit with you? If it's a no, it's a no, and then she can go and do something else.
Yeah.
Not place a judgment on anything.
Okay.
But then again, if you go and you would be rejected, that it's an inquiry.
Yeah.
It's not a demand. It's just
Yeah.
a request. Can I sit with you? If it's a yes, it's yes.
Yeah.
No, it's a no. Don't place a judgment on it, and you act upon that.
I'm loving how it's different every time when we do this.
The lack of response, the response, meaning the inaction, the fact that you have a response in your brain and you decide not to react to it, meaning just to let it through because you're so grounded that you don't care about the external
Yeah.
situation or conditions.
Okay.
Would that be the best?
That's frontal cortex.
Yeah. But how about just look, we're assessing the situation. A conclusion has been drawn from what they're witnessing. No one likes me, I'm a loser. One optimistic way of looking at it is, I was late. You see? They all had to meet each other because they've got a team sport on Saturday, and I'm not part of the team.
Is that not a sign of that? Is that not a pessimistic thing?
Some victimization.
No, what it is what we're doing is we're saying it's not about me. This person is making it about them. The pessimistic way of looking at it. But an optimistic way would be...
But it could be about them.
It could be. But it also could be the fact that I was late, there's not enough space, they need to all talk with each other because they've got an important game on Saturday and I'm not in that team. That it's a deliberate...
That's more like telling yourself something that is not true. Well, I think assessing the situation is like...
How do you know that's not true?
Well, that's not true. What you say that, well, I was late or this and that. Assessing the real situation is, they don't like me. But who cares? Who cares?
No.
It means they are not my friends, so I have to move on, try and find some more other friends.
So we've got a lot of pessimistic thinking in the room at the moment.
The reality
Yeah.
of the situation. If it's a fact that they are there, if someone doesn't ask you to sit and
Yeah.
your friend is standing, this means they don't like you. That's what it is.
But we know that they're your friends.
If I have a friend,
Yeah.
and I see a friend, I would go and that's
Yeah.
normal. That's because there are some norms in a life that regulate the friendship or something else.
Yeah.
The optimistic way would be not to look at
Well,
that.
the optimistic way.
Hold on, sorry, I can't...
Go on.
Yeah.
Actually, I have a question.
Yeah.
So you're approaching it from the perspective of this is a fluke, it's a coincidence, she was late. And it's very easy to be optimistic in case it's a fluke. But I think the real challenge lies when it's not a fluke. When this is a targeted, how do you stay optimistic when life puts you in real challenges?
Absolutely.
A 12-year-old kid really doesn't have a friend.
Absolutely. But
It's not one-time fluke, she was late, they had something.
what
General thing that she's
yeah.
struggling to find friends.
but what this
How do we maintain a positive outlook?
well, we'll come to that. But all this at the moment is just an exercise in framing the situation. How can we look at the same situation from an optimistic versus a pessimistic way? Yeah.
Just going back to that, you can also say, oh, maybe they're just going through a phase.
Yeah.
They don't want to be with me.
Yeah.
But next week they're going to be my friends again.
Absolutely.
That's
Yeah. That would be another way of assessing the situation from an optimistic angle. Yeah.
What you said is relevant to optimism because if she was late, that means that there is something she can do about it.
Absolutely.
So it means next time she can try to not be
Yeah.
late, and then she can. Her hypothesis would be tested. So then, if she wasn't late and they still don't want to sit with her, then she'd do another assessment and she would explore.
Absolutely. So you're talking about agency there. Yeah.
Nevertheless, it puts her in a situation where she can actually do something about it.
Absolutely.
Not make them like her.
Yeah.
So that is pessimistic because there is nothing she can do there.
So what you're saying, she's got agency there.
Yeah. So what you
Yeah.
said, it makes sense in that sense that if she's late, then at least she can do something about it.
Yeah. So it's a great exercise, this, because it always stirs up a huge amount. Yes, sorry?
So I was going to say, maybe they didn't see me walk in.
Maybe they didn't see me walk in. Again. These are... yeah. Yeah, because all we're doing right now is just assessing the situation from 2 points of view. An optimistic style and a pessimistic style. Sorry, you put your hand up, did you?
I was just going to say that you shouldn't make a negative assumption straight away. Is it about not making assumptions before you have facts?
Well, that's, yeah, without getting the facts. Yeah. So I'm going to bring you to what we call the explanatory style. This is the basis of optimism versus pessimism. It's actually, optimism is not about whether you have this trait or not. It's actually really about how you explain events. And a pessimistic thinking style, because that exercise we just did just now is about was a way of analyzing and looking and thinking about a situation. A pessimistic thinking style, you'll believe that a situation is permanent. This will last forever. When this has happened once, it means that it will always happen. It will keep happening. A pessimist believes that the negative event is pervasive. It undermines everything that you do. If you're really bad in one area, you're bad in everything. The pessimistic person will nearly always say, it's me and it's my fault. Yeah, it's what we call negative narcissism a lot of the time. I am worse than everyone else. I'm special and different. I'm special and different in a negative manner, which is often I work with a huge, far more that's the root of people's issues than any kind of normal, what we might call normal narcissism. And that it's uncontrollable. There's nothing I can do about it. Which brings back to your point just now, that the optimistic person would think, I can do something about this. Optimists believe that negative events are temporary, they will pass. They believe that this event relates just to this one situation. So maybe when I came down to lunch and no one would sit with me, there was a one specific one-off reason this time. And being able to just even contemplate that first. The optimist would contemplate that. The pessimist, it would never cross their mind. This is a very key in here. It's not personal, as in this is not, in brackets, entirely my fault. So it's taking you out of the negative narcissism there. That, this bad event, maybe it is my fault, but it's not all about me in a negative manner.
Do you mean that there's a dynamic? So they think there's an ongoing dynamic, so it's might be partially my fault.
Yeah, they would explain it as, I've got a part to play here, but it's not just me. There are other people involved in this. It's part of a causal chain, yes.
Can you still be optimistic in a situation where you really can't do anything about the way things are? Say something happened without your fault, like, I don't know, someone spilled their drink on you.
Someone spilled their drink on you.
Ish, no, I can't think of an actual concrete example, but a factual situation where you literally can't control what's happening.
Yeah, I think it's rough because you always have agency over your emotions, over your reactions.
The reactions, but the actual
Yeah.
situation itself, can you actually still stay optimistic?
Okay, let's go back to your example of someone spilling a pint on me. Yeah. Someone spills a pint on me, the pessimist will think that's always going to happen. When I come to this pub, I'm always going to have a drink spilled on me, etc. The optimist will be like, oh, that was an accident. So I can't.
Why say like, oh, he's mad?
Yeah. The person who spilled, the pessimist will say, oh, I'm so unlucky. I'm so unlucky. I somehow caused this. It's my fault. And there's nothing I can do about it.
There is something I can do about it. I don't think there's anything.
Yeah, you can, what you can do is you can change the way you see the situation.
You can do things in the future to prevent the same thing
Yeah.
from happening.
Or you can be responsible for your emotions
Yeah.
and not put your reaction on
Exactly. Yeah. But the optimist will always think there's something I can do. I can do something I can do next time. Yeah, or there's something that I can do. People have talked about I have agency over the way I react, or that I have agency over how much I let the feeling bother me, etc. So, how we explain things really is the root of optimism and pessimism. And so when I did that question, the questionnaire is very cleverly set up and tricks you in a way that shows whether you have an optimistic or pessimistic thinking style. It'll say things like, your car ran out of fuel. A, you forgot to fill it up, or B, the gauge was broken. I'd be like, oh, of course, it's my fault, etc. Could it have been the fact that actually the car was broken, the gauge was broken? I didn't contemplate that. An optimist would. It doesn't. maybe I did forget to fill it up, but it's just a way of thinking about the world. Yeah. So, how we explain events is what needs to change if you want to go from being pessimistic to more optimistic. You know, if you were late, the pessimists say I'm late because I'm an idiot. I'm always late. This is the way it's always going to be, so I may as well just accept that. The optimists who say I was late, okay, I was a bit distracted on my phone, I missed the tube stop, but I could actually tell myself that next time I won't go on Facebook when I'm on the tube, etc. You know, the ability to be able to see that, to explain things, is key to this. And what I found in my work is there are certain exercises, and I thought it'd be quite good just to do one exercise with the group today, just to show you one way we can start changing from a pessimistic to an optimistic style. And I've seen clients take this exercise, take it away, and just do it again and again and again and again and again, and it makes a huge difference. You have to forgive me, I put this, I've got a much bigger PowerPoint, and I had to just put it, reduce it, so I'm not quite sure the order of the slides. I did it a little bit last minute. But is there someone here who would like to volunteer with a situation they're struggling with at the moment? Okay, yeah.
Oh shit, I didn't.
Yeah. And everyone else, you can help me out in trying to remember parts of this. Yeah. Is there something you're struggling with at the moment?
I haven't been able to figure out my invoices, to send my invoices for a company, because they're paying Bitcoin and I don't know how to do that.
So I can't work out how to do my invoices.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is what we call the ABCDE model to work with optimism, what we call learned optimism. Okay, so the A is what we call the adversity, the problem. I can't do my invoicing. When you tell yourself I can't do the invoicing, what are your beliefs, your negative beliefs?
That if I don't do them correctly, maybe the transactions are irreversible. Meaning
Yeah.
if they transfer me 20K or 50K to the wrong address, I cannot have them back
Yeah.
if I don't write it correctly.
And what's your negative judgment with that?
That I might legitimately mess it up.
Therefore, I'm what?
I'm pretty stupid and
I'm stupid, yeah. This is one that comes up all the time. What else? How else do you judge yourself?
I don't have enough resources to fix it myself.
Okay, so therefore I'm what?
I'm not integral, not integral.
Okay, so I'm stupid, I'm not integral. What else would you put in? How else do you judge yourself?
I'm not mature enough to do it.
I'm not mature enough, so I'm not capable.
Both.
Okay, yeah, so if we were in a therapy session, etc., we would go on much longer with all these negative beliefs. But let's just take, I'm stupid, I'm immature, and I'm not capable.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll take those. So when you have those three beliefs, those negative beliefs, what are the consequences of that? So what does it make you either feel, do, or not do when you tell yourself I'm stupid?
Inability or inaction.
So yeah.
Inaction is the biggest.
So what, do you procrastinate?
Yeah.
Okay. What else? So when you procrastinate, what's that make you feel?
It creates tension within your body.
So you get tense? Do you get anxious?
Anxious.
Yeah.
And a little bit angry from time to time.
And angry as well. So you get anxious, tense, angry. Okay. And what else happens or doesn't happen to you when you tell yourself that you're incapable?
Can you reframe the question?
Sure. So when you tell yourself you're stupid, you get anxious, you get tense. So when you tell yourself you're incapable, what happens to you? And the other thing you said when you're stupid is you don't act, you procrastinate.
I think it depends within, if you have a history of succeeding, you would usually try to solve it, but there are some things that you can legitimately think that they're out of your control,
Sure.
not out of your capacity. So you kind of just get sad and get inactive.
So you get sad as well,
Yeah.
and you don't do anything.
Yes.
Okay, so just to sort of sum up, we've got this adversity around invoicing. We've got these B, the capital B is the beliefs that go with that. I'm stupid, I'm incapable. Let's just stick with those two for the moment. And the C is the consequences of those beliefs. I get angry, I get tense, I get anxious, I can't act, and so on. Yeah, maybe I isolate, I procrastinate. So that's what we call the standard. That's the standard CBT model of showing how our thinking affects how we feel and what we do, both the behavioral aspect and the emotional aspect. So when we have these beliefs of believing you're stupid and incapable, it actually has a massive impact on you when you believe those things. It stops you from working. It generates anxiety and anger and so on. Yeah. So what we need to do, the capital D of the ABCDE model, is we need to dispute those beliefs. Now, it may be true that you've been stupid. It may be true that you're incapable. But what you need to do is look at the whole picture before you make the full judgment. So when we dispute, we have to use a technique. We have to imagine, no problem, we have to imagine that those negative beliefs is the prosecution in court. You are stupid, you are incapable, and as a result you do these things, have these emotions, and therefore, and so on and so on and so on. You need to be able to dispute that as if you are the defense team. And you have to take that mindset, because the pessimistic thinking usually keeps coming and goes, yeah, but, yeah, but, yeah, but. But you have to allow yourself to look at the other side first. So the D is the disputation as if you are in court. You're sitting there and your legal team is defending you. So you have to come up with evidence. And this goes back to something you were actually talking about, is building up the evidence to counter the pessimistic thinking in that cognitive exercise with the 12-year-old. We need to come up with evidence. So give us some evidence that says that you are not stupid.
I lecture in many places.
Yeah? So you put that down.
Yep.
What else?
I've had really good salaries and really good jobs in my life.
So I've had really good salaries and really good jobs in my life. Yep. Have you got a good degree? Have you got... Yeah, I've got a good degree, and so on. Any other... just, again, we would really flesh this out, but for the time, in the moment now, we haven't, we're doing this example. What else would be some evidence for that?
That I've managed to live in many great places.
Okay, so I've managed to live in many great places. Okay. So already, what's happening to you when you go through this?
I think you feel better.
You're starting to feel better already?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's also dispute the I'm incapable.
I've finished college
I finished college
degrees.
degrees.
I've lectured in very high
Yeah.
institutions.
I've lectured in high institutions.
I learned languages without having
I've learned languages without...
significant practice.
Yeah.
Of it.
I mean, what you might be experiencing right now, what's your name, sorry?
Alexander.
Alexander right now is starting to fire up a whole load of positive neural pathways. It's getting in a bit of a loop, in a positive loop here. Yeah.
Can you use information from other people, feedback from other
Absolutely,
people
all the
to
time.
dispute
Yeah.
this? Is that a healthy way?
So totally.
Relying on
So we want internal and external evidence. So I would say, you're asking intelligent questions. You clearly can't be stupid. If you were incapable, you wouldn't be here, and so on. There's all sorts of things. Yeah?
What if you look at least one time when you did the invoicing correctly to prove to yourself that you're actually
Yeah.
not incapable,
And your defense lawyer would probably come up with that. Defense lawyer would say, hold on a sec, you paid all our invoices on time. You're pretty good at that.
Yeah, so instead of looking at other things that you're good at, look at least one instance in which you think you're bad, but you actually managed to succeed.
Within that context, absolutely. Yeah, we keep going. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if I can dissent a little.
Sure.
Maybe an option would be to take that feeling as a message that actually this isn't the activity that Alexander is best at, enjoys, should be spending his time on, and that he'd be better outsourcing that to somebody else to do, who can do that constantly.
Yeah.
Why not?
And that's absolutely, when we come up with those things, I totally understand why you're saying that. Sometimes we think, well, the defense team might just leave that on the side.
You cannot be good at everything.
Yeah.
That's fine. It's not
Yeah.
indicating. It's not. It's no.
Yeah.
In no stretch of the imagination is it indicating your general
Yeah.
abilities. It's just something that
Mm.
it's not your specialty. It's fine.
My inability to do the invoicing doesn't say that I'm terrible at everything, and so on and so on. So if we were to really flesh that out and keep going through that, and if you just the E of the A, B, C, D, E, it's the least satisfying word I find, but it's called energization. Is what happens to you when you actually connect to that evidence, the counter evidence. You already said I feel.
It actually makes you feel really good.
It actually-
For whatever reason, like whenever I heard like some of the bad things,
Yeah.
I kind of like started feeling like a little bit lower.
Mm.
But when you provide evidence on how does your previous activities or life or achievements have been good, and they're recognized at least by yourself, your mental health increases.
Yeah, but your mental and look how in how much of a short time we're able to just turn around how you felt just by changing the way you explained an event. Yeah, we call that the energization stage. Now, we did that in like 5 minutes. Yeah, and we would really go into that, and you'd write it down. It'd be something that you can reflect on and keep reflecting upon. Doing that doesn't mean you're automatically going to suddenly not be a pessimist anymore and become a natural optimist. It has to be learned. You have to keep doing it. I keep catching myself thinking this way. I need to keep turning that around. Yes.
My question is, obviously we're using that example.
Yeah.
By thinking that, it makes you feel better, but the invoices are still not done.
Absolutely, but we're just. But what we're looking at here is, am I pessimistic or optimistic? The truth of the matter is he's much more likely to be able to then do the invoicing now that he's not anxious, uptight. When you are in what we now argue is more of a coherent state. Now, you've been able to see the whole picture. You've been able to look at a wide range of evidence. You calmed down, didn't you? And you actually felt a bit better. When you're in a coherent state, your heart rate variability is much healthier and much smoother. When that happens, the prefrontal cortex in the brain is stimulated and the amygdala shuts down. You're able to think much more clearly. As a result of thinking much more clearly, you're much more likely to be able to act. So you're getting these virtuous cycles just from doing that. So just from doing that exercise, it makes you more likely to be able to do the invoicing and then be a bit clearer. Maybe you do the invoicing and you're just rubbish at invoicing. But then it's like, okay, I will delegate. Yeah. To answer your thing is we often sometimes it's like, well, actually I need to delegate, but I can take credit for delegating. And so on. Yes.
So what about instead of telling yourself that, yeah, this and that and being
Yeah.
optimist, rectifying the problem why I didn't do the invoice. So that's the reason why I didn't do the invoice. So probably I didn't have time. Probably I was busy with something else.
Yeah.
I was doing this and that. That's rectifying the problem and sorting out the problem for the future. Instead of having these positive thoughts which it will make you happy for the moment, just past the problem, but the problem will be still there, but you will feel good. Yeah. Probably you will be, next step will be, you will be
But you just
able to, you know, if
you just went through that whole cycle we've been talking about, though. You said that you've reflected on it. You realised maybe you were tired. You were this. You were that. So you,
find a problem and
yeah,
sorting out the problem. That's been real.
absolutely. But the optimistic way of looking at it allows you to get there. If you were stuck in the helpless, pessimistic place, you wouldn't be able to do any of that. One, you would probably be too triggered and overwhelmed. In trauma terms, we talk about something called the window of tolerance. If you're not within that window of tolerance, you can't act. You either get into fight and flight, or you become submissive or dissociated. So when you're in that kind of helpless state, you couldn't act. You couldn't rectify the situation. So, but what when you have an optimistic mindset, way of looking at things, it brings your emotional levels into a more coherent state, and then you can act. So you get into these win-win situations. But that A, B, C, D, E model, anyone can do. And if you struggle with it, get help. You know, as you said, that when I got feedback from the others, I was able to take that as well. Sometimes, you know, ask someone, am I stupid? And they go, oh, ask someone who's going to give you, you know, not sort of sugar-coated feedback, but no, you're not stupid because, and write it down. Take it with you. You know, it's all about collating the evidence and allowing yourself to be the evidence.
So basically, just to sum up, in terms of you being in the context, what you do is you overcome this obstacle, which is actually yourself in your mind, so as to be able to overcome the obstacle which is outside, which, like you said, you then
Yeah.
able to handle the impulse.
Absolutely.
And by doing it continuously, you build up the meta.
You build up resilience, you build up this optimistic mindset that then perpetuates you to be able to cope. Yeah. Yeah. And I really like what you said, though, earlier, is about we can get to that position where maybe I have to delegate.
Well, he was saying a lot about having multiple degrees.
Yeah.
It doesn't probably require somebody with multiple degrees to do the invoicing. There are people, companies that specialize in doing that. Surely his time is better spent doing what he's good at doing
Yeah.
and enjoys doing, and he can afford to outsource it.
That might even come into the defense part, the disputation part, is actually, I don't even need to be doing the invoicing. I've got other people who can do this for me, and so on. Yeah, but exactly, you have to be thinking clearly. So we have to have tools to get us into that coherent state. And that's just one tool of many, but it's a particularly powerful tool because it's taking cognitive behavioral therapy and adding another element in terms of learned optimism.
Ah.
Put it on again.
Or has it run out of batteries, maybe? Okay. Well, the rest of the slides were basically just examples of why optimism is good for you, why it's good for you, why it's good for your immune system, why it's good for your heart, and so on, why people who are optimists tend to be more popular. Life is easier because people gravitate towards optimists. They often have solutions, you know, and so on. And we can all cultivate that. That's what I find one of my favorite it sounds so patronizing, case studies. Someone I worked with, one of my favorite things that I ever saw happen. I worked with someone who was one of the most traumatized and dissociated people I'd ever met. This was someone who had grown up in the 1950s with an intravenous drug addict mother and no father. That was very rare in the 50s to have an IV drug addicted parent, and it wasn't in this country. So as a result, this person had to live in a convent school, and with her sister, age 4, every Sunday, the parents of the other children would come and take the kids out. And every Sunday, she would be at the window staring and wait 6 hours. And every Sunday, her mum never came. And she'd sit there with her sister. And this went on for years. And she would say this was the most traumatic memory of her childhood. And then when we would try and do specific targeted trauma work, which is another story, she would say, "Oh no, it just happened. It's in the past now. It doesn't bother me." There's this huge conflict because this was someone who just couldn't cope anymore. This is someone who'd been in rehab for about a year, and they just couldn't cope. And they had a child, and they didn't want to damage the relationship with their daughter, etc. And I was in this situation of like, what the hell am I going to do with this person? Because they're so split. The dissociation is so strong between the one part of them that knows that they're deeply damaged, and this other part is, no, it's fine. And you would see this switch, which you might sometimes see in people with borderline personality disorder, when someone just completely switches in a moment. But this person was switching into a dissociative state of just, I'm fine, don't worry about me, but clearly they weren't. And this was a very talented, successful person in certain areas of their life. So I had to go back to the drawing board, and we did 9 months of kind of exercises like this to build up their capacity to then be able to reassess the situation. And one day I came along and I saw, because this was in a residential rehab situation, they were just sitting there, and they showed me this book, and they had been doing this ABCDE exercise for about 6 months, and they showed me all the things that they had been doing almost every day, challenging the way they think, challenging the way they see the world. And what was extraordinary is after that moment they'd shown me, so they were proud to show me instead of keeping it all hidden, they showed me this, they suddenly were able to process all that trauma. But the beautiful thing about it is that I'd only shown them something, and they'd gone away, and they'd had that experience a bit like you had had of, oh, I felt a bit better, I'll try it. And they kept trying it on their own, and they kept trying it on their own. And then they got from doing that, they developed the self-esteem themselves to get well. You know, it gives me little goosebumps now to just think about how this person was shown, all I was doing was passing on an exercise that I had learned amongst many interventions in my work. This person had gone away, taken tiny bit of hope, maybe a bit like you might have had from that gentle exercise, and done it themselves, and completely changed the way they saw the world. But they had to do it every day. But they had self-actualized that. And that, to me, was, you know, one of the most gratifying things I've ever seen in my work. You know, really seeing someone change themselves. They changed themselves from one of the most pessimistic people I've ever seen into someone who was able to do enough work to get themselves back working again, for example. You know, I'm not saying that they were rosy happy or anything, but they had lifted themselves out of that hole. And a couple of weeks ago, I was running this retreat in Morocco, and I had possibly the most pessimistic, depressed person I've ever worked with. And I was like, I didn't know what was going to happen. We were taking, this person was part of a group, we were going surfing every day, staying in a really beautiful place. It was 25, 26 degrees every day, sunshine. You know, the team and everyone was just fantastic. You know, it was really great. And this person was like, oh, those buildings in the distance aren't right. And there's a tiny bit of rubbish. And it's like, we're in Africa, but you know, there's rubbish there. And we were doing these exercises, these savoring exercises of go into positive memories, and you'd write, people were writing, you know, the first time I rode my bike in London, or, you know, when I scored that goal, or, you know, these great positive memories, and they just scribbled on this file nothing. You know, just, there's nothing there. And the fact is, if there was nothing there, they wouldn't be on the retreat, they wouldn't be coping in life. The only thing that got through to this person, who was actually bringing everyone down in one way, they were resilient enough for it not to be too bothered by it, but it was kind of a bit, was just going through that exercise with them. That similar exercise. Somehow it got through. It's very powerful. And they woke up the next morning and they wrote a WhatsApp message to everyone saying, I'm so sorry I've been so negative all this time, and really embraced the rest of the week. And it came from just changing the way they explain the events. They had woken up the next day and something had changed, in that they believed that they could actually do something about it. They weren't at the mercy of everything. And that really is the difference between the pessimistic and the optimistic style. The pessimist believes that they're at the mercy of everything. There is no control. Nothing I do matters. Had changed to, I might just be able to do something about this situation. Now, I didn't give you the history of this person, but they had a really rough time. Yeah. But the fact is, they had somehow tapped into the fact that there was an element of causation in their happiness that came back to them. And I think that is deeply optimistic. You know, that's the crux of this. Is, so if you find yourself, and there's objectivists in the room. I've met many very, very pessimistic objectivists. Now, what I'm hoping that you might see today in this context, which I was planning to start with, but it didn't go that way, is that we are currently living in probably the greatest time ever to have been alive. Our standard of living is unbelievably higher than at any time. Our life expectancy is through the roof compared to the past. There's people now saying things like, the average person in the UK is richer than a millionaire in the 70s. In terms of what we have access to, in terms of cheap goods, in terms of, there has never been a better time to be alive in terms of human flourishing. Human rights are much better. Everything is objectively in a better state than it's ever been. So why, on this global macro level, everything is so good? Why are people so pessimistic? And I really think it comes down to the fact whether people believe they have agency or not. That's really it. And I've noticed this, working with people, is when you actually realize that you do have free will, in a way, you can change something, you can make a difference to your own life and the way you see it. That's where it lies, because you can be presented with all this evidence the world is better, but if you think, oh, nothing I do makes a difference, you're not going to be able to grab hold of that. So you really have to change the way you think to be able to enjoy that, the fruits of this incredible world that we live in that is getting better and better and better and better. It's not like, there are huge flaws in everywhere, but if we look in context, and I refer you to Steven Pinker's work, Enlightenment Now, and etc., Johann Neuberg's work on progress, etc., it's all there. We need to change the way we explain things to get to that place, to then be able to get to the place that I started the talk today about, in terms of being happy, be happy and flourish. If we are mired by this pessimistic outlook, you're again not going to be able to enjoy that positive emotion, that engagement, those positive relationships, meaning and purpose, and a sense of accomplishment. The person with a pessimistic mindset believes that accomplishment they didn't have anything to do with it. It's just luck or what is. The optimist would be like, I had a part to play in that. And then the esteem and pride that comes with that allows you to then engage in these other things. I wanted to end with a slide with a fantastic quotation from Martin Seligman's latest book, The Hope Circuit, but the laptop's died, so I won't. But so I hope you've got something from this evening's talk. I know there's going to be a bit of a Q&A now, which is often, I find in my experience, I enjoy the most when I go to talks, but also it allows us maybe for you to get maybe what it, in particular, the reason you came here tonight as well, could be maybe clarified. So I hand that over to you now, but thank you for listening, and I hope you got something from that.
So we have a microphone here for the Q&A. The cable is not that long, so who wants to ask a question? See, Rita?
Yeah.
Just go on the live stream, that's why.
Hi. Early on in your talk, you mentioned about how trauma can change someone's outlook on
Yeah.
life. I just wanted to know how common you think trauma is, and can a human being expect to go through life going through at least one bout of trauma, or can they go through life without ever experiencing trauma?
Most people go through life. Most people's response to trauma is actually resilience and growth, and something we call post-traumatic growth. The reason that some people get post-traumatic stress disorder is actually comes back to their attachment style as a child, nearly always. And there's a whole lot of research there that shows that you can nearly only really develop post-traumatic stress disorder unless you've been tortured. That's the sort of one anomaly. But basically, you know, those soldiers that go to war and don't develop post-traumatic stress disorder, if you look at their histories, they nearly all had a secure attachment with a parent. Those who go on to develop PTSD nearly always have an insecure, avoidant or anxious attachment style with a parent. And if you really just want to know if you want to find out whether a child has got an insecure, avoidant or anxious attachment style, or what we call a healthy or secure attachment style, you know, when you see a kid playing, ask them how their mum is. A child with a healthy attachment style will go, I don't know, she's fine, I think. Doesn't cross that child's mind. The child that goes, oh, mum's been really ill, or dad's being really violent, or whatever it is, you're looking at an insecure, or you're looking at attachment issues. But a child with a secure attachment just wouldn't even cross their mind to think how mum is. Mum's fine. So, to answer your question, most people don't develop PTSD, etc. They mostly actually learn from the event, come through it. You know, that Nietzschean phrase, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, is often the truth in most people. But if the trauma is too severe, or the attachment style or the prior history of the person is, if they're, you know, just in sort of layman's terms, damaged, then it's very likely that they will develop PTSD. What happens with PTSD is, in terms of the thinking style, is, as I said, it gets flipped upside down. And that's to do with the fact that when you are traumatized, the prefrontal cortex doesn't switch back on when you're connecting to certain memories. So the traumatic memory is stuck in the limbic system in the middle of the brain, where there's no sense of past, present, future, etc. So when that's being triggered, the prefrontal cortex isn't on to be able to, you know, go through that process that we did earlier, etc. So someone gets raped. The classic example, I'm afraid it's all too common. I work with this so much. A woman gets raped by a man, and she develops this notion that all men are rapists. Now she knows that her father isn't a rapist, and her brother's not a rapist, and all her friends, loads of her friends aren't rapists who are men, but this belief comes in because the brain is so affected by the trauma that they can't make those links. Yeah, so this, and that's the irrational side of trauma. You know, like the Vietnam vet walks down the road, hears a bang, jumps in the bush. Someone goes, "Hey buddy, the war's over." He goes, "I know the war's over. It's been over 20 years. Here's a bang," jumps in again. It's because it's stuck in the limbic system and the connections haven't been made within the brain. It's fascinating when if you look at all the CAT scans, when you look at someone pre and post with, yeah.
But it's only triggered at the moment, at the event when it appears, when something reminds it, or
Yeah. Well, one of the sad things that happens is people ruminate when they've been traumatized. They keep replaying it in their mind. They keep re-traumatizing themselves, keep going round and round and round, and you get these horrible vicious cycles going on. But does that answer your question? Yeah, okay, thanks.
Was make a question? Was to ask something? There you go.
Yeah.
You mentioned a book to read about optimism.
Yeah.
I wanted to know if you had any good suggestions on books to read about this topic.
So I definitely start with Learned Optimism by Martin Seligman.
Salomon?
Seligman, S-E-L-I-G-M-A-N.
Thank you.
Yeah.
To
And
start
I'd definitely start with that book.
Okay.
It's the seminal work on learned optimism, as in changing the way you think and the way you react.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
not at all.
You mentioned a lot about well, how the conscious part, well, the prefrontal cortex isn't so much engaged when there's, like, I guess, trauma.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask about more so like best methods maybe to train your subconscious to be more optimistic versus just your conscious mind. Like I've read a lot about you know, kind of hypnosis that you do during your sleep, like listen to like a loop of something that you've told yourself. Would you say that's, like, I guess, very significant to becoming more optimistic?
There are certain therapies that you can do to facilitate post-traumatic growth, which is a way of learning from a traumatic event, etc. But the best way is to actually do these exercises, because your unconscious is really all those things that have been conscious in the past stored in the back, and then they come back out again. So if you keep reinforcing the conscious mind, it will affect and change your unconscious.
Okay.
Yeah. So things like hypnosis and stuff, I find are really good interventions for getting you on track, but then you still have to do the work. I don't think listening to a CD at night is going to have nearly the same impact than doing, say, the ABCDE exercise regularly.
Right.
But there's also some exercises by Nathaniel Branden, sentence completion exercises, that are very powerful in changing your unconscious as well. Because what they do is it brings out what's conscious on the page. Then once you are seeing what's conscious, you can start challenging that, or changing that, or accepting it.
Okay.
Yeah. Nathaniel Branden. Yeah. 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem is the book that you would want to read. But you can just Google Nathaniel Branden sentence completion exercises. Very powerful introspection exercise.
Hi.
Hi.
I was just wondering whether there have been any studies on really, really young babies and whether they show whether babies can be inclined to be optimistic or pessimistic. Are we all born optimists until proven otherwise, or is it a trait that you always develop because of certain things,
I think
incidents that have
what's
happened
really
in childhood?
interesting is like that the research is showing that there's X percentage of the way we behave, etc., has a genetic element. But the fact is there is this still really significant, huge element that's within our conscious control. But there are definitely babies that cry all the time and babies that seem happy. My girlfriend's got 2 nephews. Yeah, they're Norwegian, so they're meant to be happy by birth, because all Norwegians think that. But that's my sarky little dig. But no, what's really interesting is one of them's 4.5, and one's 2.5. And they definitely have very different dispositions from a very young age. The youngest one, I think, is going to be in special forces. All he wants to do is jump off everything, swing down everything, run to everything. He just loves being alive. Yeah, he loves food, he loves singing, just everything he loves. And he's not formed enough for that to have come from experience of the world. So there is an element there. But I think the most important thing, if you could get from tonight, is that there's that causal agency that we all have to change. There's those parts of us as well. You could. Seligman argues, I think you can change about 20% of your range in these. Well, that's a huge amount. Even if you're 20% less depressed or 20% less pessimistic, that will make a huge difference to your life. Yeah, but I don't know. I'm not a huge expert on developmental psychology. But it's but I've definitely, just from my own experience, seen, just look at a bunch of 2-year-olds. Yeah. But never underestimate the impact of the parents, what they're projecting onto the child as well. I'll just show you something really quickly, the difference. You ever been to the park and you see a dad throwing the child up in the air and catching them? And personally, I get quite nervous when I see it. But when you see that it's nearly always a dad. You always see that the child and the dad are totally locked in, totally trusting, totally engaged, and the kid's usually going more, 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 higher, higher, etc. And and then along comes another kid and thinks, "That looks great. Can I have a go?" So the dad goes, "Okay," and throws the child up in the air, catches it, and the child runs off screaming. And the child runs off screaming because they haven't had enough of what we call positive affect tolerance. The child and the father didn't go to that straight away. They had months of doing that. The child, has learned a very benevolent relationship with the father, etc. Whereas the other child clearly didn't have any of that. Weren't hugged enough, weren't kissed enough, weren't fed regularly, etc. And that often explains why people who, when they get into a new relationship, all they wanted was that new relationship. Desperate to be in the relationship. Get together with someone, that person tells them they love them, and they run. It's not necessarily because they're being a prick. It's actually often that they've never been able to build up what we call that positive tolerance. See how you next respond when someone pays you a compliment. Do you look them in the eye, maintain eye contact and say thank you? Or do you do something like, "Oh, well, but nice shirt, oh yeah, but someone else gave it to me, I didn't choose it," etc. You're looking at different tolerances of positive affect there. And that's a really key part of development with young children, that develops in Randian terms a sense of life. Benevolent and malevolent, and I'm afraid the parents have a huge part in that. Yeah.
Hi. My question is, can someone learn to be optimistic by himself, or does he need external help? And if the answer is he needs external help by a therapist, or by other books, or by someone that guides him through, which kind of criteria would you have for him to see if he's actually an optimistic person enough, or if he needs external help?
I only see people who come to see me because they need help. Okay. Yeah, but you don't need other people for that, but it really helps because other people are of such tremendous value to you. Their feedback is is indispensable.
Is it like creating a startup without help against having an incubator or an accelerator?
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
So it could save you, it could save you a lot of years.
It could save you a lot of what?
Years.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, but you know, I would just start saying to everyone, even if you're doing really well, you know, try some of these things and see whether it's going to take you. Because what I love about the positive psychology movement is, prior to the positive psychology movement, psychology was primarily, apart from, you know, people who are just interested in process, was primarily about getting people from a sort of negative state to zero. And the belief was that if you got to zero, you'd be happy, but actually that's not true. When you get to zero, you're just zero. Yeah. And what the positive psychology movement is about, flourishing. So how can I flourish? So I work with some people who are doing really well, but they want to do even better. And that rubs off on other people as well. So you get these wonderful win-win situations. Yeah. But yeah, it's saving years.
Thank you. My question is optimism something that can be learned or brought up to the children? So for example, if the
Absolutely.
parents are very optimistic and if the child is like, oh, I'm really bad at it, by the child then saying, by the parents actually then saying, well, you just need more practice and then you will be good at it.
Yeah. Well, one way of looking at the parenting is, you know, it's just help the child to see if they're being really negative. Let's try and look at this in another way as well. Yeah, you know, not because what a lot of parents do is stomp on the child. We want to just sort of encourage and allow them to, you know, bring them up, etc. You know, like one of the things that Angela Duckworth talks a lot about in her book on grit is that one of the big mistakes we make as parents is if your child comes along and has drawn a picture of a castle, I don't know, you know, something like that, and you go, wow, look how talented you are. That can often have a very negative effect because it creates what we call a fixed mindset, that it's all about talent. But if you say to the child, look how hard you've worked at that, well done. You know, there's different ways of framing things, and always the focus on agency. So the same with if they're being really negative, bring it back to the agency. Bring it back to the agency. Even children have free will. Which part? All of it?
What's the difference between it's a beautiful, you're very talented versus you put a lot of effort?
Yeah, telling a child that they've put a lot of effort into something shows them that hard work and effort is really what makes you succeed in life. Telling a child that they're just talented often says that, oh, you only did that because of what you've got in you, not what you've done. Yeah. So we want to say, because Angela Duckworth's thing is, she comes up with the fact that talent times effort creates skill, and then skill times effort equals accomplishment. So effort counts as twice. But people get focused. If you just think, oh, well, what happens when you focus just on talent is other kids think, oh, I can only do that if I'm talented. But actually that's not true. The research shows that actually talent is not nearly as important. Actually, so someone last week was telling me this so that when they were at school, they used to go and smoke and drink in the bushes, and there was a guy there who used to just run up and down the hill next to them, and they said that he was really average at sport at school, but he would always run up and down the hill. And he said, oh, I used to think, what a loser, this person said. He said the guy only went on to become England captain at rugby. Yeah, he had some talent, but he had this tremendous drive. And that would come from, he would have had a very optimistic mindset. I can change the way I am. I can improve myself. It's possible. It's not just fixed in my genetics and that's it. Yeah.
Going back to the questions, like, for example, if you tell your child, obviously you would never say to your child, oh, your picture is awful. but then he or she goes to school, and the other child would not see
Yeah.
the picture as beautiful.
Yeah.
It's like it will be honest. By saying to the child that you put a lot of effort, would the child be then more confident, more optimistic by comforting the other child who will say, "Oh, this picture is horrible"? Would the child then respond, "Well, I put a lot of effort"?
Well, I would look at that more in terms of like, if I was the parent, etc. Look how much effort you put in and how much it's improved from the last picture you've done, etc. And don't worry about the other person, not about them. Yeah.
But wouldn't that also build the resilience against the other, like criticism? Because I feel like if you tell the child the picture is great all the time,
You wouldn't tell the child. That would be bad parenting. Yeah. There's a great book on optimism in children as well, that followed the Learned Optimism book. Yeah.
In that context, wouldn't it be good to focus on the child's own evaluation, so you could
Yeah.
ask,
Again.
"What do you like this picture?" And then
Yeah.
that would build the resilience against whatever.
Are you a coach?
Whether no.
Have you ever thought about coaching?
No.
No. You seem to have a natural. You pick this up very quickly. Yeah. It's impressive. Yeah. Yeah. You're integrating this very quickly. It's fascinating to see.
Psychology-related knowledge.
Yeah. But you picked up on the key concepts of agency. The most key there. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So pessimists often say that they lower their standards or expectations because they want to protect themselves from being disappointed or heartbroken or hurt. What would you say to pessimists? In order, because if you want to turn them into an optimist, you're telling them to get rid of this thing that is protecting them.
I would say just, are you looking at the full picture? But in Seligman's book, he talks about the fact that you should actually, never employ optimists in your accounting department. You want pessimists in the accounting department. There is a context. There is naive optimism. And there's realistic, optimism. And there's times when you should, within the context of the situation, choose which way you want to go. Yeah. Yeah.
Does food, having good food, healthy lifestyle help in the help the brain probably being more optimism? Having a healthy
I would say if you have a
lifestyle
healthy lifestyle, you're
and
much more likely to be able to think more clearly. And also you would also have the building blocks for the right neurotransmitters. So for example, in treatment now, one of the things that when someone comes in and they've been a raging alcoholic or drug addict for a long time or eating disorders, etc., one thing you'll check is, are they getting enough nutrients to rebuild the neurotransmitters that have been so damaged or depleted? So I don't think you could say a good diet will make you more optimistic, but a good diet will give you the option, to think clearly. Because remember, we're fully integrated being of consciousness and body. We're not separated at all in any way. So, yeah, you want to eat well. An optimist might. One thing that I hear, that optimists don't eat that well sometimes. They forget to eat and things like that. Razi.
Yeah.
Have you got a question?
No. But are you sticking around for a while?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, great. So, if anybody wants to talk to Josh, he's going to be around.
Yeah.
Hopefully, we have the room until 11 or 12, so we have it for a while. And also, there are pamphlets of Ayn Rand's essays in the back. They're free. Please pick one up, and the books are meant to feature.
And there's also, if anyone's interested, there's some flyers for my positive psychology retreats, etc. at the back if anyone's just interested in seeing any of that. Okay, well, thanks for having me.